Thank you to SpeedRobo Games for sponsoring this video. So, I've probably mentioned this before, but for those of you who don't know, I'm a fencer in real life, the kind with the pointy ends, and when I was introduced to Warriors of Legend, I of course had my interest piqued. This game actually does a really good job of simulating the quick pacing of real hand-to-hand combat, even though it is a turn-based card game, and historical accuracy was taken into care for the weapons, warriors, and moves you'll be snapping back and forth with your opponent. Games are super short, only lasting about 10 minutes or so, and the rules are very simple to pick up too. My kind of game for this busy time in my life. Each card you play will have a positive blue or a negative red cost associated with it. This is your momentum resource, so if I play this Ignore Wounds card, I gain 1 momentum and then resolve the text. If I play a red card, I need to pay that much momentum in order to play the card. Now, you'll notice the defensive keyword here on Ignore Wounds, so typically cards can be broken up into 3 categories: offensive, defensive, and style cards. So during a round, you have to think about whether you want to deal damage, block, or use your turn as a setup for the future. Both you and your opponent are going to play simultaneously actually, so both place a card face down in front of you and then reveal once everyone is locked in. Similar to the classic card game of war. If your opponent plays an offensive damaging card on you and you happen to have played a defensive card, you might negate some or all of that damage, so it's really good to save these for your opponent's biggest attacks. And here is where the game gets interesting, because a lot of your decisions come down to predicting what your opponent is going to play. You don't have much time to figure this out either, because one round is simply playing 1 card, and then you move on to the next round, play 1 card, and keep going until somebody's life points are knocked down to 0. What I love is the natural conversation that starts happening where you start to throw out some bluffs with your opponent and have to read their facial expressions to call their bluffs. It might not actually be part of the game, but I think in-person games benefit so much more than anything you could do online because of this. Having said that, what you're looking at here is the Tabletop Simulator mod on Steam, which you can install free of charge as long as you own TTS. It's a great way to check out the game before you buy, and while I do think it is better face-to-face, you can still get in each other's heads over a voice call, and that mental game just adds so much in my opinion. So, offensive and defensive cards are pretty self-explanatory, but what about style cards? These are like an enchantment in Magic the Gathering terms, a structure in Faeria terms. It's basically an ongoing effect that doesn't leave the battlefield. Now, this can be a pretty OP card because it usually affects a majority of other cards in your deck. This card, for example, which I am not going to try to pronounce the name of, increases all damage you deal by 1. To put it into perspective, most damaging cards deal between like 1 to 4 damage. So this style card, when drawn, is a huge spike, and that is common with style cards. It does speed the game up in those moments and put pressure on the other player to close out a win sooner, but it can feel a bit unfair if only 1 player draws this early game, similar to like Ancient Beastmaster decks in Faeria. So I wouldn't mind if these cards were toned down just a touch, or were just straight up given to the players at the start of the game as like a hero ability or something, just to make things more fair, or at the very least, if a more interesting decision had to be made whether you play this style card or play a different card in hand. Because so far, this seems like an autoplay with how powerful they are. Maybe if it left you open to an attack the next round or something because it's like your setup move, I don't know. Another sort of setup move you can do is to spend 1 momentum to discard your hand and draw a new one. Sometimes your hand might be clogging with high cost cards or even too many defensive or offensive cards, and this just lets you cycle if you need to. If you do manage to play all 5 cards in your hand, you redraw a full hand of 5 for free. So you are rewarded for sticking it out until everything is used, but of course you'll have less flexibility the fewer cards you have in hand. Each deck also has their win condition pieces to close out the game in a reasonable time, and so far these are all offensive cards called finishers. So each time you play a red card, this actually gets added to your chain. When you eventually play your finisher card, all of the little red momentum symbols on chained cards get totaled up, and you deal that much damage to your opponent, plus whatever other effects on the finisher card. So the endgame gets super tense because now both players have built up this big chain. It's late enough in the game that someone's finisher has likely been drawn, and you now have a ton of pressure on those defensive cards and have to carefully predict when that finisher is coming down. If it is fully blocked, your finisher will be discarded, but your chain will stay intact. Otherwise, the chain gets discarded along with the damage that is dealing. And this is all you really need to know about the rules. The matches are very quick, like I mentioned, which makes this a great travel game, and it doesn't come with a lot of pieces to it. There are some tokens for special effects that happen, but honestly, these are so simple and usually only last a turn, so you don't necessarily need tokens to remember the effects. Just 2 decks of 30 cards and something to track life totals. The quick pacing really brings out the essence of hand-to-hand combat and losing or gaining momentum as you're fighting, and so do the predictions you have to constantly make. Should I strike them here, or is there a big blow coming my way and I need to pull back and defend myself? It's like each card you play is another move you're fluidly transitioning to in battle, and you're not taking turns back and forth with your opponent and pausing on each move like a typical card game would. This is all happening in an instant, and I think it captures that combat feel so well. I was chatting with the developer a bit, and he mentioned all of the historical accuracy that was taken into care when naming the cards and coming up with the faction design. So the Norse Berserker, for example, might have really aggressive attacks that leave them a bit vulnerable and exposed, and the German Landsknecht will have names you can't pronounce. Overall, I love how this game tries to mimic realism and incorporates a little bit of history as well. It would be really cool to read a fun historical fact or something on each card, because I love learning about this stuff, and I think there is maybe room for that on like the backs of the card or something, but there is a small line of flavor text on each card to briefly describe what you're doing with each move. I also love the big aspect of having to read your opponent and playing those mind games with them. It would be nice to see this part of the game pushed even further though, to where perhaps certain cards aid you in predicting your opponent's next move or something like this. At least if it's done cleverly. It definitely has to all fit with the more realistic fighting moves back and forth, but I think there is room for more predictability synergy. Maybe that just means adding more cards to each faction, so there are known cards you have to be considering playing around or not playing around. Valuing that risk versus reward situation that comes up in many card games, I think has a big home in this game, and I would love to see that explored further. The developer has mentioned there are new cards coming to each faction, with new warriors as well coming, and this will open up a lot more possibilities with deck building. Currently, there isn't too much flexibility, and you basically are constricted to a smaller card pool. But so far, I really like the casual vibe of playing in person with someone and actually talking with them about what you or they are gonna do and getting in each other's heads. Although this isn't actually part of the game, you don't have to be trying to mentally play with each other. It would be cool if there was something that encouraged this just a bit more. Don't know what that is exactly, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. And if you want to check this game out for yourself, I'll leave some links down in the description, as well as my promo code you can use over on speedrobogames.com for free US shipping. Just make sure to say "Moon Me Daddy" while you're checking out, and you'll get 3 years good luck if you yell it out of the top of your lungs. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.